Hi everybody, on here, and I'm coming to you with this month's Connecting Codes video, and I'm trying a little bit different format here this month, and hopefully we're going to have everything work out smooth, so when I go to upload it, it's not going to be an issue, everything's going to be there, and it will work out really well. Anyways, I have had some requests from people that want me to connect more of what the codes say and connect it to the world events and things that are happening so that they can start to see those connections as they're playing out. And for those that don't know, I am the author of this book, The Code Journey, and it's a daily guidebook for life on Earth. And while this is, for everybody, everyday living, it's amazing how many of our world events actually play out and how much it shows in here the different types of things that we're likely to experience in our world and seeing these connections come together. And this is a book, it's about 775, 780 pages. I put it out every single year, new edition for every year. And so one of the things that I used to do was to work with a couple of guys in the UK, Jared and Richard, and they had a show going on their paranormal channel, Debate Now, that I was on month to month, and they're each kind of doing their own thing now. So I thought it might be great to bring in some of the format that we used from that show in presenting the world event informations on the Connecting Codes channel. So I'm thinking that this might be a great way for us to bring in some of the connections in here and bring in some of these insights of things and to show how the world events are connecting into this. And I think that is going to be kind of interesting for people, and then kind of giving my perspective of where we want to keep our eyes on as we move into the next month in June. And you guys can definitely let me know. You can, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let me know in the comments, hey, I like this format, I don't like this format, and, I know that some of my videos, a lot of my videos are a lot longer than other people's videos out there, but I also only put it out once a month. So hopefully that kind of offsets some of that energy. And I've got a lot to delve into here today, so I really do want to kind of get into this. But definitely let me know. Like I said, each year this book comes out, and each year, right down to the days, from the year, the months, the days, it all has all these different insights. So what I'll be doing is working, maybe more on a month-to-month basis so that we can see these pieces connecting and talking a little bit about the events that are going on in the world. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring my screen share up here, and I've got everything checked as far as I know so that you can see the different things that I'm sharing and hear them, and it should be all good for us this time. Really hoping for that to come out and be the best here. So let's start right off, and in these monthly pieces that I have broken down, I have them broken down by the month, and then there's sections within the month's energy that I like to break down. So we have, for example, things from like the 1st through the 20th, and then the 21st through the end of the month, and these correlate with different planetary alignments and things like that that are happening as well. And this work actually is developed from, for those that aren't familiar with the Code Journey work, it's developed from a blend of over 50 different modalities, practices, belief systems, philosophies, things like that. It is really my own language as a magi to bring the information forward and to translate different things so the information in the book is really a translation of how different things are interacting in the world and what's going on. I'm just going to get this box out of the way. It's driving me nuts. And so it kind of gives me an idea of what our influences are. It helps us to understand on a day-to-day basis, is this really a time I should be out protesting in the world, or maybe this is a time I should just sit back and observe things a little bit more. And so I've broken it down in these different sections, and we'll look at things like around the full moon and the new moon and all of that. So hopefully this is going to be interesting for you. I'd love to have your feedback on it. Just let me know. And let's go ahead and start in here. Now, in May, in the month we have aspects of where it talks about dealing with challenges where we're turning over our power, greater fear coming up in those people who are operating without integrity, bullying where there's freedom happening, so where people are reclaiming their freedom, where we're seeing bullying attacks come up. And these influences, by the way, happen in our own personal lives. This isn't just about world events. A lot of things happen in our personal lives, but they're also happening in world events. And that's the interesting thing about the codes, is that we each have our individual experiences going on with these pieces, but then we also have what's happening in our world that is coming out, and that these information is coming through as well. So, and then also attempts to control the masses. So all of these pieces fall together actually in a great amount of information that's coming out, and this is for the month of May 2021. It comes out in this aspect of Project Veritas, who did another major exposure on Facebook. And they had some whistleblowers that came forward from Facebook. They were working internally. They've exposed these internal docs. And of course, I'm always going to put the links for you in the description section so that you can go and read the whole articles yourself, listen to full videos, things like that. But they had two Facebook insiders that came forward with internal company documents that detailed a plan to curb vaccine hesitancy on a global scale. So not just in one area or one country or any of that, but on a global scale. And of course, we've heard all of these things about how big tech companies are working with different organizations and different world leaders and things like that to promote certain agendas, and how they're very connected to a lot of the globalist agendas in there. And you know, they said that part of this is that they stated the goal was of this feature that they've incorporated is to drastically reduce the user exposure to the vaccine hesitancy comments. And so they're trying to block people from seeing them. They don't want certain things to get out. And this, to me, just validates, because the more you try to cover something up, the more that you're doing something you probably shouldn't be doing, in all honesty. The more that tells me there's an agenda in place, and that there's, you know, a conspiracy that's been created by people to put something in motion that is about control and about power and about these different things. And so they go on, but you know, there were two of them, like I said, that came forward, and they said that they use a tier system to determine how a comment should be censored or buried and things like this. And again, you can go in and read all of this. I'm going to play a little bit of this clip that they have on the projectveritas.com website. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's much longer. They have the wording, so you can see that here in the screen for you, because it's a little hard to hear on this particular clip, because they've kind of muffled up the voice on it a bit. So you'll have to listen into that. And let's take a quick listen of a couple of minutes on this.
It comes time to standing up for a world I want my children to live in. I don't want to leave them a world to where they don't have these liberties. People aren't allowed to have voice, and yet Facebook tells itself with promoting people's opportunity to have voice. They're trying to control this content before it even makes it onto your page, before you even see it. If I lose my job, it's like, what do I do? But that's less of a concern to me.
We have just obtained multiple leaked documents from inside Facebook, this time detailing a plan to curb, quote, vaccine hesitancy on a global scale. It was so concerning, it brought us not one, but two whistleblowers from inside Facebook who are ready to speak out on what this means for free speech and public discourse on their own platform.
Facebook uses classifiers in their algorithms to determine certain content to be what they call vaccine hesitant, or they call it vaccine hesitancy, and without the user's knowledge, they assign a score to these comments that's called a VH score, vaccine hesitancy score. And based on that score, will demote or leave the comment alone, depending on the content within it.
Our first Facebook insider is a data center technician who leaked us multiple internal documents detailing an algorithm test being run on 1.5% of Facebook and Instagram's nearly 3.8 billion users worldwide. The goal? To, quote, drastically reduce user exposure to vaccine hesitancy in comments.
And it's the same thing. You see a lot of this difference in their public policy versus the private policy, right? The public policy is very vague, it's very ambiguous, and it's designed to be questioned because it's designed to be able to easily defend. But then if you look at the private policy, it's much more clear, much more specific. I think that they're trying to make it seem like they're not doing as much, or that they're just kind of like generalizing it, like, oh, we should have some robot that just tags your post, and then, you know, we look at it. But I think they don't want people to know. We actually have some language that we made specifically for vaccine hesitancy. So the main document, along with all the attachments and stuff that goes with it. So basically, when they write this algorithm, it goes through Facebook content, and it looks for certain keywords that are related to vaccination or, you know, not getting a vaccine, stuff like that. And it gives it a score, and the VA score means vaccine hesitancy, which is defined as being hesitant to get a vaccine, but not just like, well, I don't know, it's even, well, I saw a study that said that someone died that got the vaccine. That's vaccine hesitancy.
So this is a beta test. This is all a beta test.
Right.
And how big is this beta test?
They refer to the test size as 1.5%. I'm not exactly sure which pool that pulls from, but I think it's comments on authoritative health pages.
You seem to think that they've already rolled this out. Why do we believe they've already rolled this out?
In one slideshow that they have, they call it their weekly progress tracker. Mm-hmm. They actually lay all this out in a chart, and you can see, you can look at the slides, they go by date. So we've got here COVID-19 vaccine safety and efficacy global, currently global 13 languages, Facebook plus Instagram. C-19 vaccine global, currently global 66 languages. And the very first thing that brought me to the conclusion that they wanted to do this globally is they were developing it in, like, you know, as many languages as they could get their hands on.
So there's like a product launch almost.
Yeah.
So you can see, and I'm sure that this isn't the only app that Facebook has for something like this. I'm sure that they have had things that they were testing out with the whole virus itself and, you know, many other things. And this is just one small piece of things that's coming out. And basically these people are saying, you know, hey, I just couldn't live with myself anymore in doing this, and I had to go ahead and put the risk. And Project Veritas has this information on here. You can come and look at it again on their website, projectveritas.com, and you can look through all this information much more detailed. But you can definitely see how this information is tying into controlling the masses. This is a huge thing, and this is a form of bullying. This is a form of fear, where Facebook is in fear. They're fear of being discovered for what's going on, for what they're doing, and so now the only way that they see to do that is to bully, to suppress, to try to silence, to squash the freedom. They are out of integrity, and we know it. They're absolutely out of integrity. Project Veritas has continued to put on things. They have more leaks that came up, and they've got more information here that you can see, that you can go through and look at this information that they have on the site on things. And then they had this piece that came out, and again, I don't know if I'm going to play the whole thing on here, but I'll give you at least a little taste of this. This was another person that came out in the vaccine hesitancy aspect from Facebook. And the thing to keep in mind is that Facebook is the one that's being opened up, but we also know that they are not the only ones. We know that Twitter has filters. They were exposed for it. So we know that these other social media platforms out there are doing the same thing. YouTube has been doing this. So we have to be aware, even though it's coming through one channel, it's happening in multiple areas.
Policy is going to keep expanding until anything can violate it. What would happen if this was scaled larger and scaled to Twitter and the internet as a whole is way worse than anything that could happen from me getting fired from my job. To me, that it far outweighs that. Because it's more than me, it's about really everyone in the world.
It's almost like you're saying that your desire to follow your conscience outweighs any potential risk there might be to you from doing this.
Yes. I think that's also the main reason why people don't want to come out with it, because what if I have 2 kids, I have, my wife, and if I lose my job, it's like, what do I do? But that's less of a concern to me.
What do you think will happen as a result of your going public?
It's going to lead to a general distrust in the general public of Facebook, even more than there already may be. And I think that a lot more people are going to be concerned about what's going on behind the scenes on their social media platforms.
Why don't you start by telling us what happened yesterday?
All right, so what happened yesterday was I was at work and I got a message from my supervisor out of the blue, basically saying, go ahead and wrap up your area and clean up your stuff, gather your personal belongings, and meet me in a meeting room in the lobby of the building. They're basically going to have me meet with the investigative team and grill me on this whole situation. Facebook uses classifiers in their algorithms to determine certain content to be what they call vaccine hesitant, or they call it vaccine hesitancy, and without the user's knowledge, they assign a score to these comments that's called a VH score, vaccine hesitancy score. And based on that score, we'll demote or leave the comment alone, depending on the content within the comment.
Our Facebook insider is a data center technician who leaked us multiple internal documents detailing an algorithm test being run on 1.5% of Facebook and Instagram's nearly.
So you can see, actually, these are people who are going to be, I think in some ways heroes for bringing this out, because so many people do not realize what is happening behind the scenes. They do not realize what is going on in these other areas, in these pieces of information, and we see such a small piece of it, but yet it's going to be coming out more and more and more, and the people are going to get to a point where they're not going to be able to ignore it. It's not going to be like, oh, we don't want to hear about that, we don't want to listen about it. It's going to be coming out, and this is just the beginning part of it. So also in the codes for the month of May, what we have is false flags that are used to create fear and degrade people. And the piece that I decided to go with on that has to do with the India variant. And this comes out of The Guardian. And I've used a bunch of different resources, different things this time. I know that some of them may feel a little, slanted towards people. Some of them are. But it's also, there's different pieces of information that are very important to come out. And I had to pull from the resources that bring out the core and the key pieces that are very important for us to grasp and to understand. So in this, India is ordering removal of content, and again, this is an aspect connected to false flags, and you'll see why I'm saying this is a false flag. They've ordered social media platforms to take down content that refers to the Indian variant of the coronavirus. Now, some people will say, well, why do we have to do that when we have the UK variant and we have the China variant and we have these different things? Well, there are differences because China's grouping and the UK's grouping have these connections in with the WHO and with the CDCs and, these different organizations. So they're kind of already connected in with them, but there's different because what has happened is they're saying that this Indian variant spread to Britain. And of course, when some of this was coming out, people were coming out and sharing videos, and I'm sure you can find them out there on the internet, that were showing, look, we don't have this massive outbreak and people dying all over the streets like you're being told. And they were video like, hey, look, it's just a normal day here. So this was really kind of an attack, and that's why I call it, put it in the false flag category, because they're saying that this variant spread to Britain and at least 43 other countries. and that the government, put out this order saying, look, this is misinformation, we don't want you putting this out, and they put a message out that it needs to be removed from all the social media companies, referring to it as the Indian variant because it's false. And it says that it's come to our knowledge that a false statement is being circulated online, which implies that an Indian variant of coronavirus is spreading across the countries. And this is completely false. Read the letter obtained by Agence France Presse. And I don't know if I pronounced that right, but that's what's there. And they cited previous calls to curb false information, false news information. So false flags, yes, sometimes they are a big event in the world, like a shooting or things like that, or riots that break out. sometimes those are false flag information. But we forget about these pieces where false flags are done because we're in information warfare, info wars, let's just say that. We're in these information wars, so they're using the technology, they're using the information, they're using misinformation for false flags as much as they're using actual physical acts of things in there. And that's important for us to keep in mind, because when they put this out, then of course they're trying to promote a narrative. Same thing with a false flag, same thing with the shootings they've been having in the U.S. These incidences are to promote certain narratives or to target people who are not following and complying what they want to have following. So actually what they did was they argued that the World Health Organization did not link any country to this B16171 variant. And so even the World Health Organization didn't link it to that, but they decided they were going to call it the Indian variant anyways. And I think that's where we start to run into the trouble. That's where we start to run into the problems. And the WHO declared the strain a global concern. Okay, so why would the WHO declare this a global concern? Could it be because India was focusing on natural remedies? They were focusing on formulas that involved zinc, hydroxy, different formulas, and they were creating treatments, which the WHO didn't want, because the WHO, of course, is involved in getting the vaccines out there. So why, so what they want to do is they want to discredit. They want to make India's tactics look like they're not working. They want to make it look. They want to make them look really, really bad, is what they want to do. So several countries have banned or put severe restrictions on passengers from it. And I'm sure they're getting this pressure from the WHO. I'm sure that that's coming in. So what they're doing is they're showing different aspects where they've, last year, and they kind of had this wave here, and now they're showing this big spike they're trying to show on this grid here. But the Indian government officials say that this is not, this again is not okay. And of course we know that there's additional viruses being released out there. There's additional, these variants, they're releasing them. And I think part of the reason why the WHO, and this is my opinion, this is just my opinion, is because just like when they put the shots out there, they do different ones for different countries. So by terming this the UK variant, what they're really doing is they're really making a distinguishment of what is happening in regards to, say, like the vaccines and stuff like that they put out. So they're trying to say that they just kind of go on to some of these different things, but what's interesting is that the Indian government, they've just kind of been under this attack, and there were aspects with this where they were not complying to certain things with the WHO. And I think this is really where it comes down to, and that's part of it. This is kind of like a backlash thing to India in regards to that. So that is just my thoughts, just my opinions on that, but I do see that as really kind of a false flag to create this fear. They wanted to use India as an aspect to say, look at what's going to happen all over the world. They're setting the platform for shutdowns and things like that again. So I think that that's really where it is. They wanted to see if it's like testing the waters. It's like saying, what can we get away with? And fortunately, there were a lot of people that came out and started promoting videos and things like that, showing, look, we're not in this thing that they say that we're in there. So the next thing that we have that's going on in the codes that they talk about, the codes talk about using race and environmental issues to guilt people and gain compliance. So when we take a look at that, what came up that I pulled was, this is one of the most absurd, really, one of the most absurd things that I've seen come out. And actually, that didn't, let me see where, there we go. I just got my things mixed up here. So actually, what we have here, I'm going to play the sound for this in a minute, is that the 1-year anniversary of the George Floyd shooting was going on. And so we've got this big thing that came out. They were having some big events going on in what they call George Floyd Square. And they're sitting there talking about, again, trying to promote the narratives and what the George Floyd incident was about, of how we want to reform the police and defund the police and things like this. And they're talking about this narrative, and while they're talking about this, there's a drive-by shooting caught on live camera. Now, these are the things like, you really can't make these things up, because it's just showing how the narratives are getting blown. It's showing how these things are coming out, and they tie these things to the race issues, right? Because that's what this is about. But then really when you get down to it, it's not about the race issues. It's about these other aspects of, let's see where we can get compliance. If we defund the police, then people are left unprotected, then we can do whatever we want. And it comes back to that whole circle of various control factors that are going on. But let's go ahead and let's take a look at this. This is just a short 1-minute clip, and you'll see what happens. And this is the thing that I think, too, I want to mention here, that we're going to be seeing more and more with like reporters and people, because they are they're having to promote these narratives, and they're right in the middle of it, realizing, yeah, maybe what I'm standing here trying to promote really isn't a good thing. And I think we're going to see more reporters over time coming out, like say over the next year and a half, coming out and saying, hey, I'm done with this. I'm just done with this. Let's take a look.
This bill of comprehensive police reform to be... just got to be careful here with some gunshots. It sounds like gunshots. I'll let you know what this is. These seem to be gunshots. Get down! Shit, where is that? We're okay. We're just going to go. Let's go.
So these are the things we really got to pay attention to, these aspects, because when you get into these things, this is what we're headed into. I mean, these are just examples that things are going to go on and on. And yes, we've had some of these things, but not on the scale that we've had them. And happening in these areas is just, this is an area that is run by people that are really not pro-America. And so when you get down to it, this would become almost normal life. just having these shootings going on constantly and having these aspects going on constantly. So this, again, is trying to push that race area. It's trying to, this is another way of gaining compliance, of saying, hey, we're targeting you. And it's also playing into the gun issues that are at hand that are very, very big right now, because people, they want those gun control pieces going on, and of course that narrative's getting blown more and more and more. And as we know, people who are real criminals, they're not getting things legally. They're not going through the system. So coming down on the system and removing the guns of legal citizens is really about nothing other than removing people's right to defend themselves. And that's really what it comes down to. And why is that important? Well, most people don't realize we're living in a world that, we need to defend ourselves. Unfortunately, we've seen more and more stories coming up that are about people who have done good things as the result of having a gun. So we're starting to see the other side of the narrative of things come out. Now, also in the codes, it talks about absurd requests without facts to back things up. So when we get into that, we have this incredible piece coming out of Ontario, Canada, which they are now handing out tickets for shaking hands. And this comes to us from Not to Be, reported on this, came out May 24th. And, it starts off with this piece where, some of the guy that wrote this is from Michigan, so he's under Gretchen Whitmer's governorship out there. And, he looks across and he says, I'm feeling sorry for the people in Canada because the restrictions there have been insane. I mean, we've seen them come down on the priests that's out there and things like that. And, if you're wondering just how far they go, this is what they're saying. This is not a drill. They're actually legitimately giving out tickets for shaking hands in Ontario. Now, there is nothing factually based of why you cannot shake hands. And I actually have another piece to this that I'm going to bring up later on in all of this. But take a listen to this. They're actually...
How's it going there?
Opportunities for City of Hamilton bylaw. I have you here in violation of the Reopening of Ontario Act, gathering with a crowd of more than 5 people.
So that's a pre-written ticket again, just for the record?
I had the ticket made up inside when I saw you out here.
So what was I doing exactly when I was talking to one of the protesters here?
You walking around, getting within room.
Well, that's how it is. So if I just talk to someone, that's within 2 meters?
I also want you shaking their hands.
Oh, that's I guess I'm breaking the law there. Okay, you got me there.
So
great.
This is the ticket, provincial offense notice, and the Reopening of Ontario Act for attending a gathering with more than 5 people.
Thank you.
Your options are on the back. Your options are to either pay it, an early resolution with the prosecutor, or you can have your day in court if you choose to.
Yeah.
You understand your options?
I understand my options now.
So there's your provincial offense.
Thank you.
Now this is an administrative penalty notice.
Oh, for what? Yeah.
This is for shaking hands with the public.
No way.
Fail to maintain a distance of at least 2 meters from another person. Section bylaw 2164, section 2.1. Once again, your options are on the back. Voluntary payment, or you have the option to be with an officer, and you can argue. Okay?
So that's strictly just for shaking hands with someone?
For shaking hands, not maintaining 2 meters.
Okay, so for the record, can I get your name and badge number?
For district number 370.
370, thanks. Lee, supervisor here, guys, as always.
Literally handing out tickets for shaking hands. If you don't think that that's authoritarian, totalitarianism, I don't know what to tell you. You are lost in some serious programming, most likely, because that is what's happening here. They cannot even shake hands as part of their reopening law up there. This is insane. This is absolutely insane what we're seeing. So, with that, moving on, I just wanted to bring this graph up because I thought it was really cool the way it fits in. And this graph comes to us by Ben Garrison Cartoons, by the way. Ben Garrison is pretty good at putting out some pretty funny little cartoons there. And this plays into an aspect of the codes that we had going on in May that is about competition, hierarchy, insecurity, trying to divide people. This is election antics is what's going on. And I think this part of things really played in really, really well. Of course, we have the big obvious piece of the war against Israel and how Biden's supporting Hamas terrorists with their tax money and stimulus packages, and we're going to get to that as well. But in this thing, the election pieces that are coming up are really going to, this is a big competition between Biden and Trump, is really what we're seeing. And we're seeing this competitive energy. And so, of course, Biden has really done a lot to trigger this. And along the way, Trump gave people a lot of opportunities to come clean about the elections. He gave them a lot of opportunities to say, look, you got the chance to do the right thing. You don't have to certify these results without knowing they're right, and so on and so forth. And it's starting to look like at this point that Arizona is going to decertify the results. We're seeing that followed by these other states of Georgia and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan and New Hampshire. And they're not just doing an audit. It's not like just running everything through again. They are doing a forensic audit, a forensic investigation. And so they're really, what is coming out in Arizona is a big thing, and they've tried to block it. So we have this competition where, the states ordered it. The states are the ones that ordered it. Trump didn't order it. But, of course, he warned us all about it. And so they're coming out saying, oh, my gosh, there's a mess here. There's really a huge mess here. And they are one step away from decertifying the results for Biden. Well, once that happens in one state, guess what? That's going to start happening in a lot of other states. And we're going to see this domino effect, and it's just going to go right down the line just like that. And this is exposure. Now, of course, Biden, he feels this big competition, so he comes out and he knows that there's things to hide. He knows he didn't get into his administration. This wasn't a thing that was done legitimately, let's say, and so he tried to stop it. Now, if you've got nothing to hide, it doesn't matter where you are, who you are, what you're doing. If you have nothing to hide, why would you ever want to stop this? You wouldn't, because if you were so confident that you won and you won legitimately and you won legally, you would want this done so that you could prove Trump wrong, right? I mean, if you had nothing to worry about, if everything was on the up and up, you would be like, go ahead, do it, because I'm looking forward to you proving Trump wrong. But you know what? That's not what's going to happen. And so we're going to see this cascading effect through all of these states. And this is our big competition energy. Now, our other big competition energy, of course, comes to the war that we have going on in the Middle East. And this, of course, has started up. Trump got the peace agreements in there. We saw that. That was in the codes last summer. And right after it went into the peace agreement energy last summer, that's when the peace agreements were made. It was going along just fine. But then, of course, we know that Biden, what he did was he, as they say here, stiffs the UAE and reverses Trump's decision to remove the tariffs on key ally in peace. And so this is, not really a good thing. This story came out actually back in February of 2021, and I wanted to do this to give a little information into how some of this came about. So it's like what led up to this big battle of what's going on in the Middle East. And Trump had signed an exemption for the UAE from the 10% aluminum tariff that he imposed in 2018. And it was perceived as a reward for the UAE's peace agreement with Israel. And this is where the Abraham Accords that you hear them talk about a lot came from. But back in February, Biden reversed that decision. And, of course, now this has opened up over the last 3 months here, all of this war that is just accelerated over into that area and the conflict that's going on over there. So this didn't sit well. This did not sit well with these countries over there, and you know, he targeted the UAE in essence. He suspended arms sales that Trump had approved during the diplomacy that led up to the Abraham Accords. You know, the press secretary, Jen Psaki, she was trying to cover for things on this, and she was coming back and saying, you know, that Trump's decision to lift the tariffs was made clearly, in our view, on the basis of foreign policy issues unrelated to trade. You know, so again, you've got this competition, you've got this battle going on. Well, you know, by lifting these, Biden ran on promises to return to the Iran nuclear deal, which is not good. We don't need Iran having really some of the most powerful nuclear weapons in the world going on there. And other allies, you know, have been opposed to this. And so when he reinstated the tariffs and then he supports the nuclear deals, what do you think that's going to do? That's going to start a war. Well, of course they're looking to start wars. Biden has been looking to start wars with Russia. He's been looking to start wars over here because they need an event to cover the bigger things that they want to do moving forward with these globalist agendas of, you know, Green New Deal, the New World Order stuff. And I mean, it's really crazy what they want to push forward, the Great Reset, things like that they want to push forward. So they have to do these things. Now, even the senators came out, and this was put out May 18th, 2021, warning Biden, you're funding terrorism, and saying you can't be doing this. And Biden's just off kind of doing his own thing in a way. I mean, when you look about this, in April, Biden administration sent $235 million to the Palestinian Authority. And, you know, of course they're going to abuse the funds. And you have to think about some of these things are the things that were included in our stimulus packages that we, the taxpayers, are paying for. Because if you think you're just getting those stimulus taxes, no, they're going to pay back way more than they ever gave you. You know, you might think, oh, the Biden administration gave me $1,000 or whatever, $1,200 or whatever, but $1,400. But they're going to end up taking, you know, 4, 5, 10 times that in taxes to cover things like this, where they sent money to all these absurd different things that have all these corrupt connections to them. And so really, it's our taxpayer dollars that are supporting this conflict. We are, in essence, well, the Biden administration, I don't like to say we the people because we the people aren't, but the Biden administration is supporting terrorism. And that's not an understatement. It's not an understatement at all. And so, you know, you can't expect to send it. I mean, these people, this was supposed to apparently go towards helping hungry children, for example. But you know, these things are all controlled by the terrorist group, the Palestinian Authority, and the terrorist group Hamas. And that means that any funds that flow in to help, say, like hungry children, for example, are controlled by the leaders of those groups. And that's why the U.S. lawmakers are warning Biden. They're saying it was sending millions of dollars into the hands of terrorists, because that's exactly what they're doing. And so you can see the conflict, and this plays right in. This is a big part of conflict. The codes call it out. The codes always call it out. We just don't always time to make the connections of these things. So, you know, this was put out by One News Now in there, and again, I'll be putting all the links into the networks for you. Of course, Newsweek also had an aspect of here in these aspects. This came out on May 13th. And with Israel under attack, we've got very progressive anti-Semitism going on, and this is another big piece of the whole uproar in this conflict. And in this anti-Semitism, this doesn't just remain in the Middle East between these countries that are battling with each other. You know, what you've got going on is you've got, you know, marches that are happening. You've got deadly attacks on synagogues that are happening across the United States. And, you know, these are being done by white supremacist groups, neo-Nazi groups. And, I mean, these are all kinds of aspects that are coming in. And, of course, Newsweek, I know Newsweek is slanted. I know Newsweek has some slants towards it. But at the same time, we can't deny what it is stimulating and what's going up. And we already, by the middle of May, had Hamas hurling 1,000 rockets and missiles at Israeli civilian centers, 200 of which landed inside of Gaza. So, I mean, this is not, you know, this is not small stuff. Meanwhile, you've got Representative Ilhan Omar accusing Israel of terrorism because Israel wants to defend itself against these terrorists. Okay? Well, this is exactly a narrative that we see all the time where they flip things, they twist things, they distort things. And they want to accuse Israel of terrorism because it's responding to the terrorist attacks that it's under. It's just defending itself. But this is how they work. They use this rhetoric and they echo it out. And this comes, you know, of course, through what they call the squad, the jihad squad members. And they're just pounding and pounding and pounding on Israel. And this is really not a good aspect, because this is just promoting so many other things that we don't need to be doing on here. So you can always read up the full amount on that as well in there. So when we start to look at some of these pieces, the next aspect of the codes talks about we must provide for the future or it's going to bring ruin. Well, now, of course, you've got aspects that are based around the new Green Deal, is like this is about providing for a future. They want you to believe that it's about saving the environment and that it is about providing for the future, but it really isn't. And what's happening is that also in that aspect tied to that is use global warming or atmospheric conditions to control things. And that really shows up where we start to see this windmill activity, and it's one of the things that they want to promote. Now, we saw the disaster that happened in Texas earlier this year where it went down. It left people frozen. It left people without electricity in winter, all kinds of these things. There's so many detrimental pieces, and they want to say this is clean energy. Well, actually, when you get down to it, it actually isn't cleaner energy necessarily, and the environmental damage that is done, and they keep wanting people to believe that these windmills are not. Well, when you get in and really start researching these wind turbines, there are just piles of metal in other countries where the wind turbines have not worked. They're not a reliable, consistable, or affordable aspect of energy. And yet they want to move people in this direction. And again, this is about control, because when you have things like HAARP that can control the weather, then you are able to control whether somebody has power or not. I mean, they can already kind of do that anyways with electricity. Let's face it, if they want to pull the plug on your power area, they can do it. They can knock the grids down. We see that happen no matter what type of power it is. But Donald Trump put this out. He made this post out, and he says, "Congratulations to Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts for the privilege they will have in looking at massive windmills that have been approved by the Biden administration and are being built in China, of course, as part of an extraordinarily large wind farm. Wind is an incredibly expensive form of energy that kills birds, affects the sea, ruins the landscape, and creates disasters for navigation. Liberals love it, but they can't explain why. In any event, Martha's Vineyard is an absolutely wonderful place. Will never be the same. Good luck. So, you know, people might not always like what Trump says or the way he refers something, but the fact is that he's right. He's pretty much always right about these things when he starts talking about them. So when we get into it, let's take a look. So OANN, One American News Network, put this out. Biden wind energy projects outsourcing jobs to Europe. Remember how Biden came in and said, oh, we got all this transparency. We're going to turn everybody, when we take them out of the coal industry and the pipelines and things like that, they'll have these great jobs in you know, more environmentally friendly things. Well, guess what? They're not getting the jobs. First of all, those so-called environmentally friendly jobs are not paying what those people were making in their other jobs. Second of all, and this came out May 17th, 2021, or actually May 27th, excuse me, the picture was taken in there, and you can see they're installing solar panels on top of this building and things like that. But he's got this push for this renewable energy. Well, this, again, it's really not renewable energy. We have bigger costs that they don't want you to know about that are environmentally things. I did some research on this. I didn't, Jessie did, I should say, did some research when she was in Utah on this, when they were trying to put wind tunnels in there. And they want you to believe that, oh, well, yeah, maybe there's a couple of birds that get, you know, hurt in the process. Well, no, it's not just birds, it's bats, it's other life forms. Bats, of course, are very important to our ecosystem, and so when you start damaging, then you'll get people that'll say, try to justify it and say, well, it's not that many. It's not that many. Well, you know, of course, these could all lead to huge, big digs in things that could be really major to go into. It could take a lot of time, but I encourage you to go out and do your research on them. And so with these things, it actually changes. First of all, it makes areas more susceptible to lightning strikes. You're coming down, you're making it more susceptible then to areas catching on fire. You're going to have greater fire hazards from them. You've got where the vibrations from the windmills disrupt cellular structure in the soil, and it starts making it very hard for things to grow. So it actually interferes with the growing process of crops, and that's an issue that's been proven in where they had some of those issues in European areas and things like that. It affects animals, say, like cattle and things like that, that are where the towers are on their property, where the turbines are on the property and things like that. And so, you know, when you get into this, what they were reporting is, first of all, they're saying that there's simply no reason for the blades for wind turbines, you know, can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. So again, Trump isn't just spewing off. He called it out. They are making the blades in Beijing. So these manufacturing jobs, they're not going to Americans at all. And, you know, there's maybe small, little tiny pieces that will go to it. The wind project is off the coast of Massachusetts. It's expected to produce enough electricity to power 400,000 homes in New England by 2023. And it's a joint venture between Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners and Avangrid Incorporated, which is part of the Iberdrola Group. And I'm sure we could dig up all kinds of incredible things, go in and look at the board of directors on there, and I'm sure we'd find some pretty interesting digs on all of that with that. But, you know, here again, when you start to get into these things, to get things moving, the developers need to see a deep pipeline of approved U.S. projects along with a clear set of regulatory incentives like federal and state tax breaks. So they're looking for these tax breaks. So we're going to give tax breaks to destroy the environment is basically is, you know, what it'll come down to. Again, they're just not addressing the different things that come into this. Their company is set to supply Vineyard Wind with 62 turbines. Now, I live on the East Coast, not far away. I'm in Maine. So I think about the ice storms and things like that we have, and I can only imagine what would happen if some of these wind turbines freeze up like they did in Texas, and you're sitting here in snow and ice and things like that, way more than what Texas gets, and you have no power for a couple of weeks. I mean, that's not going to fly here. That's not going to work out in these areas. This is going to be an absolute disaster. And I can only imagine the uproar. You're going to have pipes bursting places. That's going to create other issues. You're going to have elderly people without heat. You're going to create deaths that way. You've got all kinds of things that are going to go wrong in this type of aspect. And major parts of those turbines, which are twice the height of the Statue of Liberty, will be made in its factories in France. So it's going to, the work jobs are going to China, they're going to France, they're going to Europe, they're not going to Americans. Okay? So we have to really be paying attention to that. The experts have estimated that more than 2,000 of these turbines, keep that in mind, which are twice the height of the Statue of Liberty, are going to be needed to meet the target that they want. And these are not going to work because these things are going to freeze up. It's going to be a disaster. Not only that, we have this aspect where the wind turbines will affect marine life. We're going to see problems with our oceans, our marine aspects, the different marine lives. They've proven this because these turbines are going to require concrete foundations to be laid in the seabed, cables to connect them to the mainland. Where is our environmentalist creating this uproar? They're sitting there saying, oh yeah, we'll support the wind turbines, but now all of a sudden we don't care about the porpoises, we don't care about the ocean life, we don't care about other habitats that are lost in this. I mean, come on. Where are the people fighting for this? Where are the uproars? This, I've talked about it, we're going to see division in liberals. This is one of the ways that we're going to start seeing divisions among the liberals. Because they're going to say, well, do we want the wind turbines or do we want to save the ocean animals? Well, we know the wind turbines are going to be a disaster, but by then how many species have you lost in the ocean area? So these things have to be laid, connected them to the mainland. This is going to affect species such as porpoises, which are disturbed by the sound of the drilling in the ocean. That's going to create an issue. A lot of your ocean life is done by the vibrations and the sounds. That's going to interrupt all kinds of fish life, sea life in there. Sand eels, whose sandbank habitats are lost when cables are laid. The House of Lords EU Environment Subcommittee found out about these things. Professor of Ocean and Society at Plymouth University said we're talking about effectively urbanizing the sea by introducing these structures out there. It's going to change the ecology and the ecosystem. Now, when you start messing with the ecosystem, it's not like you're talking about just one species being affected, because when you affect one species, you're going to affect another species, which affects another species, which affects another species. So you're going to have multiple species that are going to be affected. So, I mean, of course, Boris Johnson, he's called for the UK to become the Saudi Arabia of wind power. He wants to put in more and more and more wind power and wind farms, and it's just going to be more and more damaging. I mean, this is all about control, and then they're going to say, well, then we got to move you into these other areas, and we got to concentrate everybody into this one little spot, and all of these things. So really, you can get in and look at this. This came out by the Daily Mail, is the one that put this out in there, and you can go in and do some more research on it. Now, moving on to other aspects of this, contradictions is a big thing that comes up in May as well. And where did we see our contradictions coming up? Well, Gates, great, another cartoon by Ben Garrison there, and basically corporate media just threw Gates under the bus. He threw him under what they call the Epstein bus. And what is that about? Well, when we take a look at that, Melinda Gates warned Bill about Jeffrey Epstein. This is right out in Yahoo News, mainstream media, so to say. And she didn't like, apparently, this is the story, now that we've heard, right, that they're getting a divorce, that she didn't like Gates connecting with Jeffrey Epstein. And so, this is, again, the big contradictions. I mean, they all have supported Gates along the way and supported him along the way with all these different corruptions, with the vaxxers, with, Microsoft, with all these things. And, of course, we're seeing everything collapse around Bill Gates right now is really what we're doing. And are they really throwing him under the bus? I don't know. Maybe this could be another false flag thing that, could be coming out. This could be one of those things that they kind of wanted to see what would happen, because they know a lot of people don't like Bill Gates. And, so there's been some big things where they tried to say, Bill Gates tried to say, oh, no, I didn't really have anything to do with Epstein, and I didn't really have any knowledge about him. And then, as it turns out, he actually had a lot of connections with them. And it was actually not just, some odd coincidental meeting, and they kind of get into that in this aspect here, and how his connections ran deeper and how there were more ties there and things like this. Well, I think what happens here is they're really afraid. I don't think that they would ever throw Bill Gates under the bus, because Bill Gates has so much power and influence. He's connected to everything from CDC aspects to the WHO, to, the vaccines, to, he's connected in so many ways that, it just doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up. And this is why I call it such a big contradiction. And I think there's so much more to come out about these stories in here. And I think they're starting to kind of say, oh, look, we're good because we're making Bill Gates look bad. But I don't buy that for a minute. I really don't, because, when you look at all these things that go on with him and these connections, it's like, you talk about somebody who could bring down the world. Like, they would not be throwing him under the bus if they were, it just wouldn't happen, because, if they had any concern about him whatsoever, or him being able, it just doesn't make sense, because he's connected to all of them. He's connected to all of them. So if they truly were throwing him under the bus, then they would all be scared to death, because he has stuff on all of them. He has stuff on all of them. So it's going to be really interesting, I think, to see how this plays out. Moving on with other aspects of what we have going on, from the 1st through the 20th of May, we had a lot coming up that was based around contracts, negotiations, misunderstandings, strings attached that could be more destructive than what's going on. So I felt like the place that this really came out or connected with, one of the things that I saw come through was this Senate Bill 7072 that Ron DeSantis put out. And this is where he kind of took a hit back in a way on big tech, and he brought the hammer down, and he said, you know what, you're going to censor people, then I'm going to make it legal for every citizen in my state to be able to sue you for censorship and to sue you for censoring free speech. And a lot of people, they came out and said, well, does that include Trump? And it's like, well, Trump's a citizen, okay? It's not just a former president. He's a citizen of that state. So, yes, as a citizen of the state, he would have the right to go in and sue the platforms in that. Whether he will do that or not, I don't know in there. But we are very likely see some class action suits come about against the big tech companies. And he's saying, enough is enough. You can't do this. And one of the big problems, he says, we don't even need to get into the election interference part of things, of this, but that, hey, they're shadow banning people, and that creates echo chambers, that creates partisan echo chambers and things. He brought up things that, I want to see if I can find this comment, they use their power to oppose orthodoxies. Their ideologies have been forced onto people. It's not based in a free society of how it should operate. I mean, he's backing everything on facts, on what is going on. And it basically gives them the ability to, the Attorney General there can take action against the tech giants who make any moves in violation of the law. And this is kind of a good thing. This is a really good thing. We should probably have this in a lot more places with it, because the grounds for action come from Florida's Unfair and Deceptive Trade Policies Act, which would see censorship and shadow banning by social media platforms as a violation of antitrust law. And it actually is. It very much is, because if people can't trust the information that they're getting off the platforms, if they're not allowed equal access to different things, to be able to see both sides of the story, then that most definitely is creating an antitrust sector in there. So that is really kind of a big thing that came out with there. And if you want to check out the bill itself, you can do this right here at flsenate.gov /session/bill /2021/772. So this is the Florida government site. You can go right on there. You can get in there. You can see the whole history of the bill from when it started. He actually started this bill back on April 1st, 2021. Shows you all the steps that are in it. It'll show you the related bills to it and the whole works. So you could go in, you can read it, you can check it all out for yourself. And it was April 24th that he approved this bill coming through in there. So just after that 1st to 20th range, we're right in the range on there. And there's actually some other things that ties into as well on there. Then what happened was the tech trade groups filed a lawsuit against Florida over their new law on this. So this was kind of some of the backlash that came around. Remember, I said there's some attachments there. There's going to be some things that we have to be careful of, these contracts and stuff. And so, they should not be allowed to ban political candidates. I mean, really, this is a huge violation of free speech rights. It's one thing when you're banning people. The problem is that it's not equal. They're not banning people who have flat out called out for violence and murder against people that are political people, but they were banning people who did not call for that. And we're speaking up. So this is where part of the truth comes in here. So that is a big thing. Now, going on with things, we have in the codes aspects of naiveness brings danger. Those who are judging are insecure. People only awakening within danger, and people ignoring what is happening and doing more damage because of ignoring what's happening. And that brings me into another aspect that Biden is involved in, which happens to be the Colonial Pipeline, where they paid, the Colonial Pipeline paid hackers nearly $5 million in ransom. And this is a big, because first of all, this opens up a whole can of worms, because a lot of it was done with cryptocurrency, and it brings in these factors of things. We saw with the Colonial Pipeline, there was all this controversy where they came through and they said, yeah, but the reason behind it was, well, we felt like it was going to be the least detrimental thing. Now, here's another example. We have to really watch this, because this is the type of thing that the government's sitting there saying, oh, well, we don't condone paying ransom money because it's going to lead to more attacks or different things like that. And on one hand, that's true, but is that what's really happening? On the other hand, Biden has done a lot, just like with the vaccines, to say, oh, well, we're not going to mandate this, but the corporations, they're just not going to let you work unless you get one type of thing. So we're seeing a similar process, I think, with the Colonial Pipeline, and that's my personal aspect. that he's kind of telling the pipeline to do this. And I can imagine somewhere it's going to come out in the midst of all of this that that there were payoffs that are going into the pipeline and into that aspect. So, this is a big thing. You can read all about it. This one is up on Bloomberg. Quint, by the way, is the site that I pulled this on. And again, the links will all be there. This showed up on May 15th, 2021 is when this came about. So it is definitely within this place where people are really naive about these deals that are going on. They're really naive about how some of these things are working. All they know is they have gas or they don't have gas, or the gas stations don't have, gas at the pumps type of thing. And it just, these are all games that are played between them all. Once you start to get into all these things, you've got CNBC, which came out, and, even some of them were kind of like, what do we do with this? So you could even see, in some of these aspects, was this the right thing to do? Should they have not paid the ransom? And so, yeah, it's a good, it's a question to come up and say, well, what are these companies promoting when they pay the ransom? Is that a bigger issue than some of the other things? And this comes back to, again, where Biden took things, he pushed things out of the country more and more, and you think, well, these pipelines are sitting in America, but yes and no, they're not all tied into what America gets, and there's actually connections when you get into all of this that starts to then again involve Russia in it. And as much as Biden tries to blame Russia for things, he's also got some connections in Russia that are not very favorable, that are issues there. So definitely want to get in and read that. When we look at the Colonial Pipeline, and we really get into, the pipeline consists of these two tubes that are about 5,500 miles long. And the thing that raised the flags in this, and again, I didn't want to get into all the background, the history, the timeline, all that stuff, which you can certainly do if you want to do the research and look at it. But where is this pipeline company originated? Alpharetta, Georgia. So what is really interesting, and what are the states that this pipeline runs through? Well, it runs through Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. Well, isn't that interesting? Because a lot of these states are states that don't support Biden. So why that pipeline versus, say, another pipeline? I don't think that there's an innocent, I don't think Biden is innocent. And I think that this plays into where people are so naive, thinking, oh, there's no way that Biden would somehow have his hands in this piece of the pipeline getting shut down and being held for ransom. I bet when the information all comes out and the pieces are all shown, I bet he darn well does. I bet he does. And that's my opinion. I'll take it as my opinion. But that's my thought, because look at the states that got hit. And Pennsylvania, what's happening? Pennsylvania just decided that they were what? They were going to take a look at ballots. So you see, it hits all these states that either are not Biden supporters. Now Maryland is split, but we know from the election time, right? Maryland was going to go to Trump. Virginia was going to go to Trump. Pennsylvania was going to go to Trump. Delaware, maybe not. It's just an interesting piece that seems to happen to have these interesting connections to it. And we'll leave it at that in there. Now, in this aspect, I'll play just a couple of minutes of this. This is where the CEO of the pipeline explains why he paid the ransom.
According to the National Constitution Center, this clause is important. That's because only 13 states were ratified or formally signed into being, while the rest grew out of this clause. Now, let's turn to the Colonial Pipeline and the CEO's controversial decision to pay the ransom. Chief Executive Joseph Blount confirmed the company paid $4.4 million to ransomware attackers. He acknowledged the decision was controversial in a statement to the Wall Street Journal, saying, "I will admit that I wasn't comfortable seeing money go out the door to people like this, but it was the right thing to do for the country." He says the pipeline had never been...
Now, I want to ask that he says that he has a conflict with it going out to people like this, but here's the problem where people are naive. You think, well, you just want to get this over with, right? You just want to do it. It's the right thing for the country. But is it the right thing for the country? Okay, because this is no different than an abuser. This is no different than any other corruption. When you pay these things out, you are supporting the corruption. The corruption will never end. It will only get worse when you do this.
Been shut since its construction. The breach shut down the 5,500-mile-long network of pipelines for several days, triggering fuel shortages and panic buying in some East Coast states. At one point, more than 15,000 stations were out of gas in the eastern U.S. Colonial Pipeline spans over 5,000 miles from Texas to New Jersey. It is responsible for about half of the East Coast's fuel supply, transporting roughly 2.5 million barrels of gasoline and other fuels daily, and it holds more than 100 million gallons of fuel a day from Gulf Coast refineries to major hubs up the coast. By last Wednesday, the national average price had already hit its highest point in 6.5 years, with a gallon of gas averaging $3. Colonial Pipeline announced operations were back to normal on May 15th, saying in a statement, "We have returned the system to normal operations, delivering millions of gallons per hour to the markets we serve." Blount said that it will take months of restoration work and millions of dollars to recover some systems that were affected by the hack. Now, according to the Government Accountability Office, the attack shed light on the vulnerabilities facing the nation's energy infrastructure. They say this attack demonstrates an...
So you see how this comes back to the nation's infrastructure. And you can darn well bet that somehow they are going to be paid for their losses. This company is going to end up getting paid. And I have no doubt that somewhere there's a connection that says, look, you pay this ransom, we'll pay you back for your losses. And here, this is where people are naive. And what's going to happen is this is just, again, a starting point. That they're seeing where these vulnerabilities are. They're testing to see how much they can take down. And it's only a matter of time before it gets bigger. Are people waking up at this point? Probably not. But again, why are we attacking the oil area? Why are we attacking the oil area? Because they're trying to move everything off of coal and oil. That's what this administration wants to do. So again, this feeds into other agendas that they want to set into motion on things. And this is where people are naive. And it's going to probably take some big danger aspect or some much bigger piece. Now, most people, okay, they were down a day or two. They didn't, it wasn't a huge issue. But when it becomes a bigger issue, the problem is people aren't paying attention to these things that are happening, and that's going to create more, and it's going to create more dangerous situations in regards to this.
An urgent need to address cybersecurity challenges facing the nation. According to the New York Times, the nation...
So there you go on that. I won't play more of that. You can go in. You can check it out. This is from a deep dive with Tiffany Meyer on NTD, and you can always go in and check that out if you want to. Now, as we move on with things, the next piece in things is we look at abundance and facing things. So things that we don't face are in the distortion when we look at the codes, and having resources depleted. Competition is a display of power between the elite, and we already looked at that with the Trump and Biden and with Gates, where that's a struggle of the elite situation. Success, where we make ourselves heard in peaceful ways. DeSantis is an example of that. He's doing things in peaceful ways. He's doing things through the law, and he's making himself heard without just being in flat-out battle. And then I'll also be talking about things that Abbott down in Texas has been doing, and I'll get into that a little bit later, which also ties into this. Now, the next aspect that we have coming up is that the codes talked about during this period of the 1st through the 20th that we would see protest turn into riots. And we have had multiple outbreaks in this. And I'm not going to get, all crazy into this. We're going to kind of breeze through it because I know this is already going to be long enough as it is. But what did we have? 17 policemen, 200 Palestinians hurt as hundreds riot on Temple Mount. So this was a protest area, became a riot. We have what the media won't tell you about the root cause of the riots in Jerusalem, and this started over something that actually happened online. Well, of course, we know it was much bigger than that as far as looking at what's happening in the Middle East, but it intensified, and so now we have riots that are starting through online chats, TikTok accounts, which is absolutely crazy, and that, broke into some of the bigger riots that happened on the streets. Then you've got, from The Guardian, Colombia enters second week of violent unrest as police crackdown on protest. So again, protest, as many as 37 people have died and at least 89 reported missing since the protests, which obviously are not protests, they're riots that are going on in there. We found that we had Antifa communist riot and trash London, Paris, Italy, and on May Day. So in this time period, again, Antifa is the big player in all of this. Hit all of these cities. We're seeing it all around the world where this code influence that showed up, showed, look, don't be out in your protest at this time because they're going to turn to riots. Also, the New York Post put this out. Police declare riot in Portland after May Day protesters break windows. So May Day was a big day for Antifa to go out and go rioting on things, apparently. Rocket fired at southern Israel and as Palestinians riot in Gaza, Jerusalem. So you had that one that came out on there. Okay, so as we get into these things, from the 21st through the end of the month, the code then talked about separation from masses or the mindset looking for freedom. Well, we saw that again in the DeSantis story. It also talked about endings, transformation, and death coming up. And in that aspect, we had William Shakespeare, who was the first gentleman who received the vaccine, died. Now, the reason that this is important for us to keep our eyes on, because, of course, they want to just say, oh, the guy had a stroke. Well, guess what? A stroke is one of the side effects of getting the vaccine. And so this is one of those things that they want to make it disconnected, but just him as well as many other people who have passed away as a result of getting the vaccine in there, they're taking this waiting period in there, and they're saying they're not giving a cause of death right off on it. So that, this is not, they don't need these long time periods for basic things. Somebody gets shot 2 or 3 days later, they're dead. That wasn't the case in him. It was a few months. He was an older person, of course, so they could always blame all these comorbidities on him. But he went into a period of illness right after the shot, which nobody talked about, and he was in this period of illness until the stroke came. So, I mean, this is not just a coincidence in things. They're, of course, trying to promote him as a hero, saying this is what he wanted, he was giving his life to, save other lives and things like this. But there's a lot of other people out there, and they sit there with these undetermined deaths because they don't want people to know it's connected to the vaccine. They're not going to be able to hide this forever. It's going to come out, and the code's coming up starting July 4th of 2021, going to July 3rd of 2022. America is on a death year. Denmark is headed into that. So in both of these countries, we're going to start seeing a lot of death. And it's going to come from a lot of different angles. It's not just going to be from here. It's going to be from a lot of different angles. And these narratives are going to not work. They're not going to work. They're not going to be able to hide them. We also have this big incident that happened in San Jose at a rail yard. ID'd as a VTA employee. He killed 9 people before turning a gun on himself. You know, again, now, why do they want to make a big deal out of this? One of it has to do with the gun factor. Look, guns are unsafe. No, guns aren't unsafe. It's the people behind it, and they're doing a lot of investigation. There is a lot of things that are coming out on this. There's a lot of pieces that are coming forward. So there's still a lot to be known about this. But again, it's the death factor. It's the death factor that we're seeing come up. And of course, we saw that, you know, too, with the monthly stuff where they tried to promote all the deaths that, in India, which, you know, weren't even totally that. So breaking through what scares us. Answers are in the past. Now, here's the interesting thing right here in my own home state, and this is actually making, you know, you might see on some of the other people that you follow where this came out, and it had to do with the state representatives who decided to go ahead and do it. Now, you have to understand, we have had some of the strictest guidelines in Maine out of any state, and it says that, you know, the masks need to be worn, but then they removed all the mask mandate. Now, for a long time, even if you were medically exempt, you were not allowed in stores here. For several months, that's been the case. And so now all of a sudden they've dropped all of the mask stuff, basically, although they're suggesting that you still want to wear one if you're not vaccinated, type of thing. But they were trying to be kept out even after the mask mandate was cleared, and they were cleared. So legally by the governor's things, they could go on. This is a 2.5-minute clip. Let's go ahead and watch it.
They're all coming in. They're all signing in. I'm going to stop you right here, okay? Stop you right here now. I don't even have one with them. I'm going to go. It's fine for you. But in order to be in my third state, your leadership said that you need to wear a mask. So we are asking you to wear masks beyond this point. There's masks, and they wear masks. When you do, after you eat beyond me, I don't care what you do. Yeah, you can't go beyond here. You can't wear a mask. That's all.
What happens if I do?
If you go beyond here, in leadership.
So you see this guy is saying, you cannot walk past me unless you have a mask on. Once you get past me, it doesn't matter. So basically he's saying he wants you to put a mask on to walk past him, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Will be responsible for whatever you do. So if Brian Pacheco is those who would like to do the speaker. And I saw him coming in.
Because according to CDC, you may have missed a conversation, but according to CDC guidelines and the governor's mandates, I pose no threat to anyone by not wearing a mask. I'm allowed in public spaces without wearing a mask because I've met.
We understand that. I don't know if you heard the question that was posed.
My mask wearing days are over.
So if you are also not in authority to answer that question, we completely understand. You're put in the middle here, as these folks are as well. That's fine. We'd like to speak to Speaker Fechtow and get the answer to the question.
He is not available right now, so if you could find somewhere where you all could wait.
We are happy to wait. Thank you, though.
We find him. Representative Andrews.
See that they're trying to create all this fear. This guy finally said, I'll be at my desk. And he just walked right on through. And this is what we have to do because we cannot tolerate these aspects anymore. We cannot be afraid of what the consequences are going to be if we are going to have our rights, have our freedom back. And this is what breaking through what scares us is about. And somewhere we will have to learn, you know, the answers to resolving this will be in past situations, but this is the answer from the past, which is you stop tolerating it and you move forward.
of legislators being denied entrance to the State House that Speaker Facto cannot make his way down here to answer that question.
As I've said, I'm happy to arrange a meeting with the Speaker with you.
So what she's saying, she'd like it now.
But you're not taking any steps to do that. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your effort.
So if you're unwilling.
See, they finally just had enough, and they all said, that's it, we're going in. Past you can't do anything. Walk right past the signs, and that is how you do it. That is what it takes. And these are important things that we have to be willing to stand by. Learning about culture and history. This was another piece in this part from the 21st through the end of the month. Learn about culture and history, connection with the past, and this is where I'm coming back to that handshaking ban that I talked about earlier and what it is about in there. Handshaking is actually an ancient tradition, and what it did was it was something, you know, we've come to do upon meeting or greeting somebody or parting, and that's part of the modern times aspect, is that it conveys trust, respect, balance, and equality. And so when you say that you cannot shake hands with people, you're breaking down equality, you're breaking down respect, you're breaking down balance, you're taking control. That's why this handshaking thing was such a huge deal as it came out in Canada, and I'm sure a lot of people didn't even think about this, of all of the pieces that are connected to handshaking, just like all the pieces that are connected to wearing a mask. And so it was an ancient tradition to, you know, that's always been a big tradition in there. So it's about peace. So what you're saying when you don't allow people to shake hands is there's no equality. You're under control. There is no equality anymore. There's you and there's us type of thing. So there's two different things. One set of rules for the elite and the government, and one set of rules for the people. And you know, this is a kind of interesting thing to see. Archaeologists discovered ancient texts. Of course, you know, we see this a lot of times in, you know, wall carvings and things like that, where it's there on a 4th and 5th century BC Greek funerary. There's depictions of these handshakings going on. Scientists suggest that the handshaking tradition started actually as a symbol of peace. Isn't that interesting? So here again, we're not going to allow you to have peace. You can't make peace with this. And this is an interesting piece of the history that comes out. Many men carried weapons and wielded them in their right hands. So if a man met someone he wanted to be friendly with, he extended an empty right hand, showing that it had contained no weapon. This is, again, then to make absolutely sure that neither man could suddenly reach for a weapon, each man grasped the hand of the other, held it firmly until each was sure he was dealing with a friend. The actual shaking of the hand may have been for the purpose of dislodging any hidden weapons in there. So handshaking was also a symbol of good faith when making an oath or a promise, which means that when you've got a government that's saying you can't shake hands, they're not operating in good faith. They're breaking promises, they're breaking oaths. That's what that lack of, that restriction to shaking hands is about, is telling you that they're breaking oaths and they're breaking promises in there. Not to mention that it's just totally absurd, but, you know, that's in there. So the tradition of handshaking was also practiced in the Middle Ages when knights shook hands with each other as an attempt, again, to shake loose any weapons in there. But it wasn't necessarily a part of the knight's code of chivalry. It's possible that the tradition of handshaking is even much older. They talk about it being something that's, you know, been around for thousands of years. And there's a very interesting piece as I come to the end of this article, which is on ancientpages.com, by the way. And when it gets down to this last little piece here, says, as a bonus, we may add in that in Italy, there was a proposal to ban handshaking in 1928. How many times have you heard me recently go back and say, look at what happened 100 years ago, because that is what is playing out today. the communist structures that showed up 100 years ago are the same tactics that are being implemented today. Well, what do you know? Right there in Italy, they had a ban on it in 1928 when these times were going down. Handshaking was considered to be, what a surprise, to be unhygienic and should be absolutely eliminated in the daily contacts of Italian citizens. This is what they established in Ontario, Canada. And it was, issued by the Italian Balilla organization, so the government organization. We got to get this down, people. If you're wondering about any of these things that seem so absurd, we just need to go in, look at the history, plug it in and say, where was handshaking banned? When else was handshaking banned in the past? So to understand how to transform the present situation, why is it so important? When we look to the past, we see these things, they resurface in our present situation. We need to learn to make different choices. And the choices that we make in our present moment are so important because they're going to influence our future. If we sit back and we do nothing, and that is just going to allow these things to get bigger and bigger and harder and harder and harder, and it's going to put us down the course of an unfavorable path. I talk about that in the book all the time. So we have Greg Abbott down in Texas, and Texas is now open 100%. Starting today, local governments attempting to impose mask mandates can be fined up to $1,000. Public schools are prohibited from mandating mask mandates after June 4th. So there you go. This is what it's done. These are the choices that are going to set us into a more favorable future. These are the choices that are going to open the doors to getting back. I don't want to say getting back, but are going to open the door to allowing us to have a life where we're living a life and that we're not just remaining in all this fear and playing into these things. And so he not only just said, we're not going to have mask mandates, he's going to impose fines on people who try to enforce mask mandates. So I'm hoping that other states will follow suit on this because it is really important for us to consider, especially where the children are concerned, especially in our school situations where children, banning people from getting an education because they're not following a rule, that's something that you see in the CCP in China. That is the way that they function in their schools. That is not America by any means. So definitely important to keep that in mind. Now, from the 1st through the 9th, one of the things that comes up in the codes is things are not what we thought they should be. Okay, so that brings me around to the aspect of unemployment things. That brings us back to the job reports. And we can see one of the big things that came out was the jobs in the economy. The April's jobs report was so dismally off target, the CNBC reporters thought it was a typo. I mean, they couldn't even really get through their news reports because they're like, and you can see it actually right here in this tape that that he did. He had to relook at it.
Let's get to Steve because he's got the numbers. Okay, good. 1.08. Steve, the number.
Wow, it just came across. Give me a second here. We have the number here. Just came across. Sorry about that. It came across very quickly here. It looks like 266,000. It looks like it was a big disappointment at 266, but maybe I have that wrong. Let me double check the Bureau website here. 1 second.
You see that? He can't even believe it because they were touting that they were going to have, the Biden administration was touting they were going to have 1 million jobs brought up during this month. They had 266,000. Now, of course, the media likes to take and spin that. And they like to say, oh, look, we increased jobs by 226,000. Yeah, but you were planning and saying you were going to do 1 million. So you really fell short by about 75%. And the unemployment rate also went up by 6.1%. So what did this then lead to? This led to them coming through, and all of a sudden you had all the Dem states, Maine included, that came back and said, well, guess what, we're all going to go back to the regular unemployment standards, so you won't have these extra options anymore, and so that will do it. Now, we got to watch what this is actually playing into, because we're going to see a couple of things that are going to happen, because all of a sudden they're going to say, oh, look, we lowered the unemployment because we don't have people on the system anymore. Well, just because people aren't on the system doesn't mean you've actually lowered the unemployment, okay? Now, there's lots of places that are saying, yes, we can't get enough staff on and things like that. They're feeling challenged that way. And so, you know, now these governors who have kept everything so shut down and have been holding everybody on the system are now saying, oh, we've got to get everybody back to work now. So it becomes this big rush the other way. But we've got to be very careful to not be deceived by these numbers, because either people are going to be totally out of work, but they're not going to be in the system, or, you know, some of the jobs will get filled again. But this is still going to come back and bite them. This is still going to come back and bite them, because there's a lot of people that, you know, this is now trying to, again, force people into vaccinations as well, because companies are going to say, well, you can't work for us unless you get vaccinated. And we're already seeing that in a lot of companies. So now you've got people that are sitting in this in-between spot of, what do? I don't want to get the vaccination. It's not healthy for me. It's not this. It's not that. And then they're going to be without a job. So they're going to put a lot of people in this hard position. So we have to watch that when we start to see some of this shift, they're not going to be true shifts, and they're not going to be true numbers. You're simply just going to have a lot of people that are going to fall off of the system and be homeless, be out of work, struggling, trying to figure out what to do in there. So definitely something to watch and pay attention to. Now, the other thing is we saw that there would be big upheaval from natural disasters is one of the things that the codes talked about. And where did we see that come about? Well, we saw that come about actually right down in the southern part of the United States, and they had a huge storm, huge severe storms that just devastated the area down there. Huge tornado that went through Georgia area. It also hit that whole southern region. Mississippi down there was affected by things with the tornado emergencies. Also flash flood aspects happening in Birmingham, Alabama. So deadly storms all across the U.S. It's amazing how many times the codes do this, and we don't see it all the time on a big scale like this, but we oftentimes will when these code influences are showing up, and it will show that indeed we have these unexpected storms. Disasters will happen. There will be damage that can come through on them. So upheaval from natural disasters, right there the codes call it. The 10th through the end of the month, what did we find? We got an energy aspect of struggle, a tug-of-war competition energy in the codes, and we see that right in where Guantanamo Bay comes into place. So we have this big thing because Biden wants to shut down Guantanamo Bay. Now you've got this whole aspect, and he claims that he's not going to relocate the detainees in the United States. Where else do you think he's going to locate them? Because the other countries are not going to take them, just like Mexico didn't take back their, people coming across the border. Biden's being stuck on this. He wants to release these people that are high-level issues, people that were involved in the 9/11 attacks, terrorists, and things like this, and he just wants to shut down Guantanamo Bay. Well, there's bigger reasons for that, because Guantanamo Bay can also be used for high-profile people. It can be used for a lot of different people that are involved in some of the most severe of crimes. And so, this comes back to this whole cycling of things in the aspects. And he wants to release 3 detainees, and the detainees include Saifullah Paracha, who was considered by U.S. intelligence as a facilitator of financial transactions after the 9/11 attack. Lawmakers cited the unnecessary risk of the American people. So he's getting a lot of pushback on this. In 2018, Trump signed an executive order to keep it open. Well, it's important because, again, where are you going to put these people? You can't just take them and release them out. And Biden has now announced that he's got goals to close it. He's got goals to close the prison. And he's putting that on the Democratic lawmakers. But that's not all totally true, when you get into it. Jen Psaki comes in and he says she would note that in order to see this process through completely and thoroughly, there are a number of key policy roles that still need to be filled within the interagency. So they're not totally in a position to do this, but this is definitely something that they've made known that they want to do. And this is a danger to citizens because the Biden administration wants you to believe that they're not going to be held on U.S. soil. Well, again, they're certainly not going to be held in other countries because other countries aren't going to take them. And so, here again, it is one of those things that this is the pushback. This is another tug of war thing. May 11th on the new moon, we also talk about that had the energy going with it, with the storm and the weather damage showed up in the codes. That connected with the southern storms. They happened right at that new moon time frame. And then also on the new moon, we had this big thing of plays for power, things being chaos, disorientating for people. And that, I find, really comes in well to what we saw happening with Fauci, because that's when Fauci's stuff came up. And we have this aspect of course, Rand Paul really called him out on this gain of function, and this gain of function is going to be a big piece because this gain of function really, it really did lead to the weaponization of the coronavirus. It really did open up these things. Fauci's trying to claim that it wasn't gain of function, but when you really get into it, it definitely was gain of function. So let me play just a small clip from here.
The technique that Dr. Barrick developed forces mutations by serial passage through cell culture that the mutations appear to be natural. In fact, Dr. Barrick named the technique the no-see-em technique.
And actually, let me jump back here. I'm sorry about that. I thought that I was back in on the beginning of this. I explained it.
It is not new. Scientists in the U.S. gain-of-function research say there's nothing to see here. Gain-of-function research, as you know, is juicing up naturally occurring animal viruses to infect humans. To arrive at the truth, the U.S. government should admit that the Wuhan Virology Institute was experimenting to enhance the coronavirus's ability to infect humans. Juicing up superviruses is not new. Scientists in the U.S. have long known how to mutate animal viruses to infect humans. For years, Dr. Ralph Barrick, a virologist in the U.S., has been collaborating with Dr. Shi Zhengli of the Wuhan Virology Institute, sharing his discoveries about how to create superviruses. This gain-of-function research has been funded by the NIH. The collaboration between the U.S. and the Wuhan Virology Institute continues. Doctors Barrick and Shi worked together to insert bat virus spike protein into the backbone of the deadly SARS virus, and then use this man-made supervirus to infect human airway cells. Think about that for a moment. The SARS virus had a 15% mortality. We're fighting a pandemic that has about a 1% mortality. Can you imagine if a SARS virus that's been juiced up and had viral proteins added to it, to the spike protein, if that were released accidentally? Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
So again, you can always go in and listen to the full set of that space, not even just this clip. You could go into C-SPAN because they're the ones that filmed it. And, of course, Fauci says, no, it's not that, it's not that. But, of course, his organization, the NIH, was involved in these funding. Even after the government brought things down, he was involved in this funding. MSN came out, and, of course, they're doing some spins on this whole story with Fauci. and what has been happening in this. And, you know, of course, this has all come out. Many people have known for a long time that this thing came out from the Wuhan lab. And more is pointing towards that. And there's more and more doctors and virologists coming out saying, you know, we should not be doing gain of function research, that this is too dangerous. There really is nothing that warrants doing that. And so we're going to see more and more speaking out on this. But I want to talk too, also, MSN here is good because they're kind of a mainstream media source, and they get into this, and they actually admit here that the NIH did fund a project at the Wuhan lab. Then they try to backtrack it a little bit and say there's no proof that the coronavirus was bioengineered. Well, if the virus has a patent on it, it's bioengineered, and the virus has a patent on it. So when you have a patent on something, it's not something that nature created. You know, we could go round and round in that. You know, some of these claims have been back and forth, you know, where they're trying to say that, look, this group, you know, backtracked on the claim there, the theory that it was created in it. Well, more and more people are coming onto this aspect that indeed it was created in a lab. And, you know, they're trying to say, okay, well, we can't say it just yet, maybe because it hasn't been fully proven, but I'm pretty sure we're going to see this proven out in the long run of things. The NIH grant to Ecohealth Alliance, which is where this whole connection, again, we see the organizations fund to the organizations to the organizations and so on and so forth, and they think they're going to get clean by saying, okay, I'm going to fund this organization, who's my friend's organization, and they're going to take the money and they're going to give it to this, and I'm going to make sure it's going to go to that. Well, the problem in all of this, as you read through things, is you realize that Fauci knew way back when that this was going to this type of research, and that he was actually made aware of it, that the Wuhan Ecohealth Alliance, you know, these people were all in contact with him as you get into the details of this. And the Ecohealth Alliance paid the lab $598,500 over 5 years, well, basically $600,000. And they had secured approval from both the United States Department, U.S. State Department, and the NIH, and that the NIAID funded the project is not in question. However, this article from the World Net Daily goes on to say that the grant covered gain of function research on a bat coronavirus, which created the SARS-CoV-2. And again, this involves boosting the infectivity, the lethality of a pathogen is what gain of function is about, and it helps researchers, they say it helps researchers spot potential threats. Well, it doesn't, because we know in the hands of people like Fauci and Gates and people like this, which we know that Gates has his hands in all of this in the background too in other ways, that, you know, these people are not using it because they care about human health. This is about biowarfare, is what it's about. And that's where all these things are starting to unfold. So Fauci is really digging deeper and deeper holes for himself. And, you know, MSN is saying, well, there's no hard proof. There's no hard proof. Well, the whole big thing in all of this that starts to come down is you've got this coming out. You've got Fauci trying to deny it. Then you've got Biden trying to stop the research, just like he's tried to stop the elections. And then you've got an aspect of Fauci saying, oh, okay, yeah, maybe an investigation is good. Well, why does he want an investigation? Because he's investigating himself in this process. And it comes down to the NIH told us. Well, the NIH is Fauci's organization, so that's kind of like, yeah, they're relying on the person who's part of the problem. And if you think Fauci is going to tell you the truth with all the backtracking he's done, that's not going to happen. he said that the research supported under the grant to the Ecohealth Alliance Incorporated characterized the function of newly discovered bat spike proteins and naturally occurring pathogens and did not involve the enhancement or the transmissibility. And this does not hold up because there's other information out there that shows that indeed they were very well aware of what they were working on in this. The grant was approved back in 2014. The Obama administration said it would not fund the projects that involved gain of function. So right there, the Obama administration was acknowledging that this was a gain of function research. So, to sit there and say, see how they twist it and they say, no, it's not this, but we have no proof it's this. But yet the Obama administration said it wouldn't fund it because it was gain of function. The NIH told us to review it after funding this, and they came back and said, oh, it's not gain of function. Well, yeah, it is gain of function. And so you go back and forth with all of this stuff. And part of the thing was they say there's no evidence that the coronavirus is man-made. And here's where you have to really watch these little twists of things that they put in here. So who's saying that it's not man-made? The CDC, the World Health Organization, and NIH has all said that. Well, these people are all bedded together. They're all incredibly corrupt, and they're all involved in genocide projects. So why should we believe any of these people? Absolutely not. We shouldn't be believing any of these people. And it says, if the virus had been altered in a lab, its genomic data would show signs of tampering. Well, if there's nothing to hide, why don't you want the investigations to go through by an objective group to do the investigation, not one of Fauci's groups to do it? And it says that there's no evidence that the virus was bioengineered. Well, that's, kind of a lie in a way. And, health experts signed a public statement to strongly condemn, these theories that it was doesn't have a natural origin. But there's a lot of people out there that are doctors and people that are legitimate people with great credentials saying indeed that it does. So, as you start to research these things, and they want you to try to believe that this originated in wildlife. Well, you don't get super viruses that originate in wildlife, for one. Again, it's got a patent on it. We know that. And they use a wording somewhere in here, and I'm not seeing it right now, that says that it evolved naturally. Oh, right here. The CDC, the WHO, and the NIH have all said the virus evolved naturally. Okay, see, this is a very tricky wording because it doesn't say that it was created naturally. It says it evolved naturally, and there's a very big difference in that. And again, these are all people who are working with globalist agendas. So if you're part of the globalist agendas, you're used to this twisting and this turning. And again, why are we looking to the accused for our source of information? We should not. You don't sit there and go to a murderer and say, "Did you murder this person? Oh, you said you didn't murder him? Okay, well, you must be innocent because you, the murderer, is telling me that you didn't murder anybody." Does that really make any sense? So this evolved naturally. Well, yeah, if you infect a population and then it evolves throughout the population, that could be considered naturally evolved. But that doesn't mean that the virus was originated naturally from nature, because they don't. When you get down to the science and the way things actually work, they don't. So, of course, there was this great post put out on there: want to return to normal, get vaccinated. So as we all know, this all comes back to those vaccines in there, and that's all part of this coming up. And then you've got, of course, these aspects not to be. Even Savannah Guthrie is getting frustrated with Fauci because he's bouncing around these guidelines and going through things, and she just even lost it with him. And you can go on, and I won't play this, but you can go on and listen to it and hear what she had to say. Now, moving on, we have in our full moon energy, one of the pieces that came up is ending victimization, silencing voices, standing up to the true corruption, true leaders, empowering people. And this is where we have this other aspect. You know, Maine, we hit the news good this last month here, this last few days here in particular, where this parent, this dad, he stood up for his rights. And there's a whole story on this. The Maine superintendent finally agreed to allowing this parent who is against critical race theory. Well, any parent should be against critical race theory if they really care about this country and they care about their children and they care about whether they can have any say in their child's life or protect their children in any way. They should be caring about critical race theory. And so this parent had spoken up against the critical race theory, and he was banned. He was banned from different things. He had put different things up in the story when you get down to it, and what led to it was they claimed that he illegally hung a poster of a school board member on the fence of the middle school, which prompted the conduct warning. So this is how they work, though. When they're under this influence of something like CRT, they don't want anybody speaking out against it. And so he had to get permission to attend his daughter's high school graduation. He had to get clearance from the district superintendent to do this. And, it became this whole big thing. And, as the superintendent, he doesn't want to. Then he tries to claim, well, I'm being compassionate as a fellow parent. And, it comes down to where they wanted to put other restrictions on them, but you can go in and read that, and that really, I think, comes down to we don't end the victimization until we stop allowing people to silence us. We have to stand up to the corruption. We need true leaders, and this parent is an example of a true leader, and I'm sure, hopefully, he is going to certainly empower some other parents along the way to stand up and find out what's happening in the school systems, because I know people that are starting to get involved in the school boards, and this is so important because a lot of parents have no idea what's been happening in their school systems, really what they're pushing, the curriculums, the different things that are happening there, and the parents need to stand up. Now, another thing the full moon energy talked about was being held accountable for actions. And I thought a really good one on that was this article that came out, showed this. Gavin Newsom has been barred from indiscriminately shutting down churches, and he's been ordered to pay $1.35 million in legal fines. So these people are going to start, being held accountable. Just like we said, the dominoes are starting to fall in there, and we're going to see more and more accountability, and I think this is just the beginning. I think he's just the beginning of the governors that are going to start being held accountable for things. And what happens in this is, of course, like a lot of the corrupt governors, is he allowed liquor stores and other places to be open, but they tried to come down on the churches. And, of course, we know about this because they don't want people connecting with God. They don't want that connection in there. And so he has now been ordered to pay this. In legal fees, this $1.35 million for shutting down the church. It was Harvest Rock Church was the church that was involved in this particular case, and he was one of the first ones to establish that kind of a restriction on there. And the judge in this, he came back and he said that he sided with the church, saying, really this is not something that you can do. And now the judge came through from this case at the Supreme Court and put an injunction on Newsom that imposed on him that prevents him or any other official from shutting down churches while allowing other essential establishments like liquor stores to stay open. So basically he's saying you can't selectively close this business and leave that one open. You can't close a church and leave a liquor store open. So because churches really are considered essential businesses. So that is the big thing on that. You can go in and read that in there. And then we also have this aspect which fits into arguments over money, greed, jealousy. And that brings us to this money laundering scheme, which is really an important thing to take a look at. This comes off of the justice.gov site, which is the Department of Justice site. And you can go in there and you can look at the different news of things that are connected to the Justice Department and what's going on there. And we had on Tuesday the 25th, right at our full moon time, 2 bank executives. And we know with the moon cycles, by the way, especially with the full moon, those interviews could happen up to 3 days prior to the full moon time frame. But this came right, within that time frame. 2 bank executives were charged for conspiring to launder hundreds of millions of dollars through a U.S. financial system in connection with Odebrecht bribery and fraud scheme. So you've got these 2 guys in there. One of them is 55. His name is Weinsverl. Don't ask me if I'm pronouncing that right. And then Waldstein, which was 73. They're both out of Austria. They've had this massive money laundering scheme going on involving Odebrecht, which has gotten itself in trouble in previous years, like back in 2016. And what they did is they defrauded Brazil's tax authority of more than $100 million in taxes, and they create off-book slush funds. Now, some people, if those people who are Trump followers, they remember Trump talking about the books, book deals and slush funds from book deals. Well, this is part of that, which he was talking about. And of course, this Odebrecht was involved in that, and they were being exposed December 21st, 2016, just shortly after Trump was elected in there. So I think this is part of what they're doing, because what they do then is they go in and they have these people, these famous people, whether, whoever they are, Hunter Biden, whoever, that put a book out there. And of course, we know they're not writing the book actually, but they'll put a book out there. And then that becomes a slush fund through these book sales and through these book deals that they get. They get these book deals is what it is. So it's kind of like, we give you all of this money from our little slush fund, and, we'll call it a book deal. We'll call it that we're funding you for a book deal in there. So these are bribes, and what these are is these pay hundreds of millions of dollars in bribes for the benefit of public officials around the world. So this is all connected to bribing. Of course, we know that, look at the bribes that went down in the Biden family, while Biden was still vice president. And you're going to come into these aspects. So hundreds of millions of dollars in bribes for public officials around the world, and that's how they use it. They use these book deals through slush funds. So you can go in, you could read more about that if you want. And then, of course, this is what I was talking about earlier with the Biden administration shutting down the Wuhan investigation. And this comes into our code pattern on the full moon that was connected to insecurities, creating issues that hold division and competition. So, Biden is feeling a lot of insecurity at this point. Of course, Fauci is as well in all of this. And by shutting this down, this is holding a division. It's holding the separation in place. It is creating a competition, because now somebody's got to step up and force this investigation through. They've got to say, look, you can't shut down this investigation. And as any leader of a country, if you care about the people of the country, then you want an investigation done. if nothing else, here again, I come back to the same thing as I said before with other things, with the election stuff. If you are innocent and you have no connection to this, then you would want an investigation done. Every American should be wanting an investigation done to find out the truth. And that's what it comes down to. No matter what side you're on, no matter what your opinion is on things, you should want to know the truth in things. And that's really the core piece of what we want to try to get to. And, you know, here again, this comes back to a thing because Trump was pushing to have the investigation done. So this is another thing that Biden just wants to undo everything that he did. It doesn't matter whether it's good for the people or not. But, of course, we know that we're going to find the connections to Biden in all of this as well. And so he doesn't want the information to come out. If you have nothing to hide, you should want this. But if you've got stuff to hide, well, this is, you know, again, he knows that this is going to massively open up MSN, mainstream media connections to covering things. It's just going to open a massive amount of doors in all of this stuff. So, yeah, you definitely would not want to shut it down, you know, if you cared at all about the people. You would want to be getting to the bottom of things. Now, the next piece in our code energy we find is a shifting of power. It talked about a shifting of power at the full moon. And what did we see come out about that? Jeff Bezos is officially stepping down as the CEO. Now, do I really think that there is, you know, yeah, you know, there are some people that say, oh my gosh, great, Jeff Bezos is stepping down. This is a really positive sign. You'll get some people that'll say that. But what is really happening, and this was released on May 27th, so right, again, at the full moon energy time frame, pulling on that energy code, he's going to be turning everything over to Andy Jassy. And Andy Jassy has been just pretty much groomed by Jeff Bezos. So, I mean, he's just going to be carrying forward Bezos stuff. And, you know, this is just one of those things where I think we're going to start seeing a lot more come out on this. And I think that Bezos is trying to get himself out of the spotlight because this is Amazon just purchased MGM. Now, we know a couple of years back they purchased Whole Foods Market, and anybody who used to shop Whole Foods, I mean, Whole Foods had some of its issues prior to Amazon taking it over, but it really went downhill when Amazon took it over. And now they've purchased MGM Studios, which we know has also got a connection to AT&T, which of course has a lot of issues that are involved with China information leaks and CCP connections. And, you know, of course, there's all kinds of underlying pieces to that in there that we have going through. Well, the big thing now is saying, you know, even other tech companies are saying, look, they're growing too big. Like, this is a total monopoly. Like, they're just literally starting to kind of take over everything. And that's really, really not a good idea. And, of course, these links will all be there where you can read more about them. And then Andy Jassy actually steps in on July 5th as the Amazon's new CEO. And I have not had time to do a dig on him. I'm sure that there will be some people like Amazing Polly or somebody who will be doing a dig on him. That wouldn't surprise me a bit if she did out there, because that would be the type of thing that she's good at. She'd probably do. But he's currently been the CEO of Amazon's web services, and he's going to replace Bezos as the CEO of the entire company, which in there. So, again, this is happening July 5th, which is kind of an interesting thing, but they said they picked that date because it marks the 27 years to that day that Amazon was incorporated, according to the reporters who transcribed the remarks from Bezos. So I don't know if that's completely true. There might be some other pieces to that that they don't want people to necessarily look at. But we have to realize that Jassy had a big influence in Netflix, Spotify, and Fortnite. And we know that there have been some big, big things come out on these right there because, of course, we had the inappropriate dance show of young girls that was out on Netflix, which was connected to Obama. So we've got all of those things coming up. So we're really going to have to watch and keep our eyes on things. Now, we have also in the northern hemisphere energy for the full moon, we had an aspect of needing to settle rebel energy or rebel energy being present and a need to approach things with greater responsibility. So part of holding people in responsibility right now is we've had 15 states that have threatened to pull assets from big banks that cut off fossil fuels. Now, at first glance, I know there's people on one side of the fence that would say, oh, this is a big political play, but you have to understand the deeper layers. And I've talked about Operation Choke Point in the past in a previous video that I did back in Obama's term, and he teamed up with Elizabeth Warren, who did this Operation Choke Point, and you can do your research on that. And what they did was, at that point, they were pushing through these things where they were telling the banks who they could and could not fund, and they would shut off avenues of things. They were literally cutting people off from loans and other things in their business dealings, specifically to cut certain businesses off. Well, now we've got Biden sitting in this office in his administration, and there's no doubt really that this command by the Biden administration to say we're not going to allow banks, and this involves John Kerry, of course, and they're getting a lot of pushback on this because they're pressuring these big banks and the lenders to say, nope, you're not going to fund anything that has to do with fossil fuels. And this, again, has nothing to do with the environment. This is about control. This is about controlling the banks of who they're going to lend money to, who can have a business, who cannot have a business. And it doesn't just stop at the fossil fuels. That's the problem, because this, this can go over into your mini marts. This can go into car manufacturers. This can go into so many different industries beyond, just what it seems like on the surface. So we've got this pushback where 15 states are really coming through and they're saying, hey, we're not going to play this game. And so, if you're going to come through and do this, now we're going to take this other path, and we're not going to have our money in the banks. We're not going to do this. So this is really about holding the Biden administration, John Kerry, these corrupt politicians who are playing games like Operation Choke Point accountable for what they're doing. And of course, the other piece of accountability we already, kind of discussed were the things we're coming down to on Newsom out there. Now, in the southern hemisphere, we have an aspect that calls for, with the full moon energy, that was calling for implementing foresight and how we really need to start, again, learning from the past and starting to implement foresight on things. And that brings us into Australia, who's in the southern hemisphere, having a big mice infestation again. And this is a huge thing because they come in, and what happens is when they get a really wet year, they get a lot of rain, it creates these plagues of mice, basically. And they go into the grain areas of Australia, and it's not just an aspect of, hey, you've got, a few mice running around. I mean, like literally they are just like pouring through things in like almost the hundreds. And it's not just like, oh, I've got mice running around my fields or my crops or things like that. But what happens is they destroy the crops, they eat the crops, they destroy them. So now that affects restaurants, that affects all farmers, that affects food supply chain, that affects all of these other aspects. It's hard to sometimes bring some of the crops back. People are losing 40, 50% of their crops and things from these plagues of the rodents and the mice. And they don't just affect the crops, they will attack the animals. They'll attack live animals. So when you have these infestations, I mean, you think about even dogs or domestic pets as well as cattle, and they will take the cattle down. They'll take them, they'll take the animal life down, the stock life down. So it's not just a small little thing. And they're trying to say, okay, well, they've spent tens of thousands of dollars or thousands of dollars on bait to catch and kill the rodents that are doing this because of this overpopulation, which is just way out of hand. And they approved a $50 million mouse plague package, which includes free bait for farmers. So when you consider this aspect, this is where we've got to learn from the past, because we want to lean on these easy solutions. Well, let's just put the bait out there. Well, we'll just, do this or we'll do that. And, certainly some of them, they use buckets for drowning. They channel them into areas and then they go into a bucket and they drown, which is probably one of the more humane ways, actually, of controlling things if you can do that. But then when you use the bait problem, the problem with that is now, again, you're corrupting the entire ecosystem that is going on, because then you have the animals that come along and eat those mice. And those mice with the bait in them now poison the animal that eats them, and then the animal that eats the animal that eats the mice gets poisoned. And it sets off a whole chain reaction, which is really hard to deal with in there. And so they really need to come down and they need to find some other solution that can help deter the mice when they're not in this explosion period, that can keep the mice under control, because mice populate ridiculously fast. We deal with mice here in Maine, not any kind of a plague aspect like this, but you certainly deal with them. And so this is something that happens every few years, pretty much, in Australia. Every time they get these, things around the grain-growing regions, about every 4 years. And so if you have this coming up, and this is like anything that I talk about in the codes, if you don't learn how to resolve it, then you're not going to get rid of the problem. You've got to change something. You've got to think, how are we going to change this moving forward? And we got to take those steps when the population of the mice is down and things. But, all the way down here, and, of course, they've got this whole history of plagues in Australia, New South Wales area of the mice infestations in there. And they actually started to see it coming up in 2020 in there. And, of course, it raises all of these concerns of stripping the food and the other items and the health aspects there. So I brought that story up because these are the things that we need to look at. We can't just say, well, something's over and done with, and then there's no more, and then we don't have to worry about it anymore type of thing. And so that's that. I am going to pop back here, give me just a moment, into, and I really appreciate everybody hanging in there with me. I'm going to just stop my share screen and bring you back into where you can see me. And so the last piece that I want to do with this is that really does it. I now want to look forward a little bit because I want your minds thinking, and maybe you can even share some things that maybe possibly come up. But I want to share with you, too, what we have in our codes coming up in June. And what's coming up in June is June, as the month itself, is warning us that we've got to be careful about being blind to the truth. And I think that's going to play in with our elections. I think that there are going to be people that no matter how much truth comes out, that they're just going to pretend to be blind to it. They're not going to want to see it. They're going to try to discount it. I see misunderstandings are coming up in the codes for the month of June. And I think that's going to tie into elections. I think that's going to tie in with Fauci. I think that's going to tie in with the Wuhan investigation. And I think we're going to see a lot of backtracking on things with that, where people are going to go back and be doing corrections on what they've said in the past. So we're going to get some of that controversy coming up. They're going to start claiming that people didn't understand them correctly, this type of thing. Of course, there's always going to be all these events that are not currently in motion, but these are some of the things that I think, you know, we're going to want to keep our eyes on. Chaos and deception coming up in June, and I think we're going to be seeing, it also warns of false flags, shootings, riots, as the, you know, and I think that these are things that the shootings and the riots are going to come as the truth comes out in things. I think that we're going to see things coming out more around Gates. There's going to be more chaos and deception around things with him. I think we could possibly have another fuel attack coming up in the month of June. I think we're going to see things like people like Newsom who are getting held accountable, and they're going to come around and they're going to create chaos and deception through appearing to do the right thing. And we can't buy into that. We have to stay smarter than that and not buy into it. I mean, they've already proven themselves as needing to be removed from office. And of course, I think Newsom's on his way out. They've got everything in motion on that. I think that that's, you know, that could be another piece of the chaos and deception. From the 1st through the 21st, we're going to be seeing who is and who is not making wise choices during this time, and we're going to be seeing a downfall of power. So some of the things I'm going to be keeping my eye on in regards to that code pattern is going to be Biden, what's going on with him. I think we could, I think he's going to continue to do his own thing. He's going to continue to go against the people, and I think that we could start to see the beginning of his removal happening during that time. I think we're also going to see some downfalls of power where groups like Facebook, CNN, Twitter, mainstream media, Amazon and stuff, I think we're going to start seeing some things crumbling within them. You know, yes, we're seeing Amazon being presented strong now and taking over things, but I think there's going to be stuff coming up. So watch for that from the 1st through the 21st. I think we're going to also see more exposure from Project Veritas. And I think there's going to be, where Fauci has made his poor choices along the way, I think we're also going to be seeing some more fall of power on him. The 22nd through the end of the month in June, I think that the codes talk about how power is being used. We want to pay attention to how power is being used, where abundance is being shared, and where there is extreme greed, because always that distortion of abundance, right, and things where things are being withheld. I think this power aspect and how power is being used, I think that's going to come up, you know, with Prince Harry. He hasn't completely gone out of the news, him and Meghan Markle. I think we're going to see some things come up in the royal family at the end of June. Boris in the UK has been under fire. So I think that there's going to probably be some things about how he's been using his power, possibly Trudeau, because Trudeau is way overstepped in Canada. We could be seeing some things there. And Biden and the Middle East and continuing to fund terrorism. I think that that misuse of power is going to come out more at the end of June. The 1st through the 11th, we also have an aspect of seeing what is and is not in divine alignment. And we really want to watch partnerships and relationships and who's connected to who during this time. So we're going to see a big success that exposes a lack of integrity. So like there will be, for example, you know, if you have a big thing come out with the election, that would be a big success if it shows that there was this fraud. And then that would be exposing a big lack of integrity, and then you could see some backlash from that coming out. We might, again, this could connect to the election results, thinking also about things possibly connected to the vaccines, what's been in and out of alignment regarding that, corrupt business deals with political leaders. From the 12th through the end of the month, we have an influence that's showing in the codes that has to do with the past is resurfacing. So that's going to be connected to lessons around money, creating hard falls where there's been corruption with money. I think during that time we're going to see stuff coming out with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies coming into the spotlight more and more, and the corruption associated with that. I think we're going to see possibly more in those slush funds, those book deals like I was talking about that the DOJ just did the pieces with on that. And the misuse of stimulus money is very likely to come out in that second half of June. Exposure on corruption connected to taxes, possibly, nonprofit organizations being exposed. Those are the types of things I'm going to be keeping my eye on, because they definitely seem to connect with what's happening at that time. From the 1st through the 24th of June, we also have code pattern of wisdom in motion, rethinking how we are living and doing things, moving more into self-sufficiency. So I think what's going to happen at this time is we're going to see some really big pushes on green energy and new Green Deal, you know, this type of thing. More talk about electric vehicles, more talk about the wind turbines. People will be looking on how to get off grid. You'll have states like Florida, Texas, South Dakota, you know, other places like that. They're going to likely start putting bans on taxes or restrictions around green energy. I think we're going to see some fight back on this because they realize the corruption that's around that. They realize how many fake information pieces there are on that. And I think we're also, again, going to see more attacks on the fuel sources, and they're using this. They're using these attacks to push these so-called cost-efficient energy sources. Well, you know, green energy. What is green? Green energy. I think green energy is not about environmental. I think it's about money and profit energy. I think the green means money and profit. The 10th, the new moon energy. We have an energy of rapid success, a desire for freedom pattern coming up, and breakthrough of lies at that time, and also needing to have patience with checking things out more, and true colors not fully being seen. So that's all coming up in June for the new moon energy on the 10th. And with that, we're going to see success for those that are able to step up and take charge. And we are likely to see attempts that are going to infringe on our rights. And so then that will lead to people stepping up even that much more and taking charge of things. We're going to see a lot of where we're living in illusions coming up. And most likely, again, that's going to be connected to things like the election results, the things around the virus, some of these things that we have already in motion. Of course, there's always going to be some things that we probably don't know about that aren't already out in the visible eye right now. And then we're going to have to be patient. You know, say the election results is a big success. It comes out and it creates a rapid success, but then we're going to have to be patient as other states go through that forensic audit process. And I think we're going to be looking for also sleepers on both sides of the fence that are going to come out possibly around that new moon time. So I'm seeing some plot twists come up and lots of exposure coming up around that new moon energy. And I think we want to keep our eye on DeSantis, Abbott, Nome, and Gates, and Taylor Greene. All of those people in those states which are doing big fights for freedom. I think they're going to be key players at this time. And then on the 24th, where the full moon comes in, we're going to have pieces coming together that are like collective efforts. And we'll see exceeding resources, where the resources are being exceeded will create setbacks. Appreciating those that will stand up for us. I think people are going to have a greater appreciation for these people who are truly fighting for our country and fighting for our rights and fighting for our ability to have a free country as it is. And so we're going to see a lot of these different pieces where we've had them all in these individual points come together, and they're going to start making more. And what that's going to do is that's going to create another round of awakening. That's going to create another layer of people starting to see what's happening as these pieces are coming together, and they won't be able to be hidden, and they're you know, going to be shown how they fit together in more mainstream channels, like your mainstream media is not going to be able to avoid reporting on it. Basically, it's going to get to a point that it's going to start hitting on that. So look for that, you know, again, towards the end of the month at the full moon. Governors that have already made shifts may start helping others that are just starting the process. So we may see, like, some of the people that are involved in the Arizona elections, they may be involved in helping the people in the other states as they go through their processes. Biden's excessive spending patterns, we're likely to find out how his excessive spending patterns are rapidly increasing the deficit to unbelievable amounts. And that's also going to bring together pieces of how he's collapsing the economy to sell us out, to bring us into the Great Reset. And of course, you know, I know a lot of people are looking at different financial reset pieces out there, and really, when we get into it, we want that to roll out under the correct influences. We want that to roll out under the favorable influences that are not coming out of detriment to other people and that are not coming out of an aspect of our country collapsing. So I think we need to keep those in mind. So again, we'll see more acknowledgement of these people who have not been playing the games along the way and who are standing up for our rights. Now, in the Northern Hemisphere on the full moon energy, what we can look forward to in June is the observation of where we are whole and where we are divided. And it talks about breaking through the barriers that were created. So we could see some things possibly coming out, like on things like the dossiers. We could see things happening with Fauci and with Gates and others who have served as barriers. You know, they've kind of been these blocks to us discovering other things, like Fauci's positioned as an expert, but he's really blocking us from finding out these bigger experiments that are going on, things like that. So they've been serving as these sort of gatekeepers. And I think Project Veritas, we could see bigger exposure coming out on big tech as well around that full moon. So we'll have to watch for that. And in the Southern Hemisphere, the codes talk about taking command of life and stress that could be there, or things that may not be as they seem, blocks maybe where people are holding on to lies in those areas. And they'll need to look to the past to know how to move forward. So I talked about that, for example, this month with the mice issue on that is going on. They've got to look to the past somewhere to find the real solutions to move forward so that they can remedy this out-of-control mice population. I think we want to keep our eyes on Africa and Australia in particular, and perhaps the Honduras and some of the other South American regions, because we could have also coming up in these regions things that connect with immigration and border issues as well coming out of there. So I'm really sensing something coming out of Africa, and I don't know what that is exactly or what that is about. So with that, that is really bringing us to an end. And again, thank you everybody for hanging in there, because I know this has been a long one. Again, I only do one once a month. So anyways, this is the Code Journey book. This is what it looks like for 2021. You can catch it on my website, compassioncodes.com, and it's a daily guidebook for your own personal life, but it's also going to guide you in things that are happening in the world and to give you some of that heads up, because, man, if you're a person that's proactive, you want to know about timing. You want to know when the misunderstandings are going to happen, and you want to know when you should or should not be out at a protest in there and when it has that potential to turn violent. So with that, I am going to stop this for this month. Thanks, everybody, so much. Put your comments in the comment section. You know, make sure you subscribe to my channel. Make sure you subscribe to get the messages so you know when the new videos come out. Hopefully once I get through writing the 2020 book, and maybe if things ease up more as the end of the year comes around, I can cut some shorter videos along the way. I just don't have time to do it while I'm writing and while I'm doing all the publicity work and all the work on the book, which takes up a good chunk of my year, which is part of why I can only put things out about once a month. But also let me know if you like this format of seeing how things have connected throughout the month, discussing the world events this way, and having that heads up of what to look forward to and what to keep your eyes on. And, you know, definitely feel free if you see something that you see connecting to let me know about it. And with that, take care, everybody. On out. and I will see you next month, Code Warriors.